Hello, and thank you for listening to Rangers to the Core. This podcast is brought to you by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, Wilmington District Environmental Education Team. With this podcast, we strive to keep you informed, educated, and give you a behind-the-scenes look at everyday life as a park ranger. I'm your host, Dylan Brown, and it is time to get to the core of today's topic. Hello, and welcome to another podcast of Rangers to the Core. I'm your host, Dylan Brown, and today we have a few new guests with us, and we'll get to that in just a moment. But for right now, as usual, we are going to start off with our icebreaker. And that question for our icebreaker today is, what is the neatest wildlife encounter you've had while working with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? I'll go first. The first one that comes to mind comes from my early years as a seasonal park ranger. I was out doing a boat patrol, and I was in the Boomer Park area of W. Kerr Scott Lake, and I just see this bird come down and hit the water real hard, and it's my first time ever seeing an osprey in person fishing. And it was a smaller osprey, kind of juvenile. Well, I see it hit the water to go after a fish, and then it flies back out, kind of circles around, and comes back and hits it again. So I got my phone out and started filming, and I filmed that osprey dive like 5 times. And I was just sitting there on the boat taking it all in, and it was super cool to witness.
Hey, I can go next. It's Emily from John H. Carr, and the neatest wildlife encounter I've had recently was last summer. I was in one of our campgrounds at John H. Carr, and I was actually trying to fix a water spigot on a campsite, and this Luna moth just came out of nowhere and landed right on my arm, which was really neat. I know moths aren't, maybe the most fluffy, cutest animal to most people, but it was just such a unique experience. Luna moths are only in their adult moth form for a few weeks. They don't eat in that stage. They don't drink water in that stage. They're only an adult for a couple weeks while they mate, and then they die. So it was just such a neat experience to be fixing this water spigot, and then all of a sudden this Luna moth comes out of nowhere and just lands right on my arm. So that's probably one of my favorite encounters, I guess.
What does it say about you that moths are willing to land on your arm?
I don't know, but I hope it means good things.
Yeah, I feel like that should be some kind of omen or something.
Right, seriously.
The moth gods were looking over me that time.
I can go next. Alec Mitchell, John H. Carr, conservation biologist. I think the coolest wildlife encounter that I've had since working here would be a couple weeks ago. We got a call for an injured owl. So upon seeing it in person, it was a baby barred owl that hadn't fully fledged out, and it blew out of a tree during a windstorm. And working with the rehabilitators, we got it taken care of, and happy story. So
yeah, that's cool.
I don't mind going next. This is Joseph. I am the forester at John H. Carr Reservoir. And I'll stick with the things that fly theme. I was setting up a timber sale a couple of years ago in Cedar Grove Wildlife Management Area. And as part of the setup, we have to make sure we're not going to impact any threatened or endangered species. And I became aware of an eagle nest in one of the areas that was scheduled to potentially be harvested. And so I found the nest, and it was right on the edge of a power line right of way. And there's a road going down the right of way. So I drove down the road and parked about 100 yards away from this nest. And I was watching it through binoculars to see if it was active. And sure enough, I could see 2 mature eagles at the nest. One was like sitting on the edge of the nest, and another was on a branch, maybe 5 or 10 feet away. And as I watched, I could occasionally see what looks like it might be the wing of a juvenile eagle rise up out of the nest and then go down out of sight again.
Oh, cool.
And I was like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest thing ever. And so I sat there. I think I might have sat there and eaten my lunch while I was watching this, and kept watching. And after a while, they flew away. And one of the adult eagles had a large live fish in its talons and its tail was flapping back and forth. And I'm like, that was probably the fish tail I was seeing and not the wing juvenile eagle.
That's so funny. That's so funny.
And I'm going to break the rules here. I know you just asked for one encounter, but I'm going to tell you a second one. I found a litter of bobcat kittens.
What?
In Eagle Point Wildlife Management Area a couple of years ago. And, again, I saw them from a distance. Just something caught my eye. And I thought, what in the world is that little fuzzy squirrel-looking thing? And looked closer, and it was a bobcat kitten on the trunk of a tree. And I stood there, probably, 200 feet away and watched for a while, very aware that if Mama was nearby, she was not going to be happy about me being there. But I watched for a while and eventually saw 3 different little kittens on this tree. I have almost never seen a bobcat in the wild.
Yeah, that is.
And that's the only time I've ever seen a kitten.
Wow, that is a special moment right there.
That was awesome.
Holy moly.
That was awesome.
That is so cool. Mom was probably watching you from like only 100 feet away.
I know.
Checking, making sure everything was going to be okay.
Yep.
She's probably up in the tree.
Mm-hmm.
Could have been.
That is a neat one. Out of all my time spent outdoors, I've never seen a bobcat in person. Got several trail cam pictures, so knew I was in the area very often of bobcats, but they're pretty elusive, and to find a den in a litter like that, that's really cool.
Yeah, they're really good at not being found.
Really good.
And I have no idea where their den is or was. I didn't get close enough to look for it, but
that's good because we want to give all wildlife space.
That's right. Yep.
I guess I'll go next. This is Grace from W. Kerr Scott Dam and Reservoir. And I also have an osprey bald eagle story. I was trying to think of which ones that I could do because I've had several really cool encounters, but this one was probably the coolest one that I just happened to be at the right place at the right time. I was working at Jordan Lake last year, and I was on top of the dam, had just made a gate change. It was coming out, and there was a lot of bird activity down in the tailwater area. And I just happened to kind of look up, and there was an osprey flying around with fish in its talons and a juvenile bald eagle chasing it. And it was just one step ahead of the bald eagle the whole time, just kind of flying all over the place and in circles and dipping down and coming back up. And then an adult bald eagle came to join forces with the juvenile, and the osprey dropped the fish and got out of there. And the bald eagles went down on the ground and got the fish. So it was really cool to see. You know that bald eagles are kind of aggressive and they can bully other, birds. And I got to actually see that in action. So it was pretty cool.
So real quick on that, I can't help but share this. I did a little research on raptors. I think it was last year or the year before. And one thing I found that was really interesting, kind of based on exactly what you saw, Grace, was the fact that eagles, contrary to popular belief, we see all these really cool National Geographic pictures and videos of bald eagles swooping down at these really pristine lakes in Alaska and coming up with a nice fish and flying off into the sunset. But they're really not that good of a fisher. Ospreys, on the other hand, are flat out experts. And what I learned is that ospreys, when they get harassed by bald eagles for their fish, they'll very often just give it up because they're such efficient fishers. They can just turn around and go find another one, absolutely no problem, and be successful. So really cool encounter to actually get to witness that, though. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah.
Hey guys, so my name is David Schwartz. I'm the ranger at Falls Lake, and for my neatest wildlife encounter, it actually does not involve a living wildlife. It actually involves dead wildlife. So just changing up a little bit involving dead wildlife. But when I was at Carr Lake, because all wildlife stories seem to happen from Carr Lake, when I was up there, we got a call on the radio that there was a dead bald eagle on the side of the road in the campground. So when we got there sure enough was a dead bald eagle laying on the side of the road. And above the eagle, actually in the power line, I think was a raccoon hanging off the power line, just dead, up on the power line, up, was it 18 feet above or so, and the bald eagle laying underneath. So obviously we don't have a story of what happened, but we can only assume that that bald eagle was carrying that raccoon in its mouth or in its claws or something like that, hit the power line, got electrocuted. That raccoon got stuck in the power line, and the bald eagle just fell to the ground and laid on the ground. So I guess you never know what you could see coming through the campground or day-use area being a ranger, even a dead bald eagle on the ground and a raccoon sticking up in the tree, or not the tree, the power line up above. So pretty cool.
Wow, that is a neat one. That's there's a lot of funny encounters out there. I shouldn't say funny, but interesting encounters out there that we run across a lot of times with expired critters. I know one of the owls that's taxidermied, I think in Kerscott, it was flying, and they think it went to fly through the fork of a tree and got a talon stuck in the fork and basically hung upside down until it expired. And so, I mean, it's just, it's just like for us as humans, I mean, freak accidents happen. I mean, and it's just, there is no predicting it.
Dylan, next time you're at W. Scott, you have to point out that owl to me, because I don't have any background stories of our taxidermy. So that's a pretty cool one.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do. I'm trying to remember where it's at, and I think it's downstairs somewhere, but I'm not sure.
All right. I think I'm last. This is Carmen Boyette with the Wilmington District NRM section. And y'all covered a lot of mine, really, at least the main topic. One of the neatest experiences with me with regards to wildlife was going out and monitoring the bald eagle nests. That was always a really, really neat experience to get the spotting scope out and monitor what was going on during nesting season. But I'll also mention something, I guess kind of a close encounter, were all the vultures that lived out or that were around the dam and such. So when we would go out in the mornings to get the morning reports, they would be out there hanging out. And so it's very interesting to see just how big vultures are.
Yeah, that is very interesting. They're crazy looking too up close. So they're something else. All right, Carmen, why don't you go ahead and take us into the core of today's podcast?
All right. So in today's podcast, wildlife or flora and fauna are a valued resource at lake projects within the Wilmington District of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. One of the primary objectives in the stewardship of our reservoirs and its lands is the protection and enhancement of wildlife habitat. In addition, the Natural Resource Management staff is committed to providing optimum habitat and protection for all threatened and endangered species found within its boundary. The Corps, along with the assistance of many partners such as the North Carolina Wildlife Resources Commission, the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, the National Wild Turkey Federation, Ducks Unlimited, and others, maintain wildlife management areas, also known as WMAs, surrounding each lake. Each WMA is open year-round and provides many opportunities for hiking, wildlife viewing, birding, and hunting in season. Other wildlife viewing opportunities are available throughout the reservoirs.
Awesome. Thank you, Carmen. So going along with the core of today's podcast, we have two new guests with us today that are very knowledgeable in their fields, and what they have to say pertains very much to the theme of today's podcast. And that is Joseph Boswell and Alec Mitchell at John H. Carr Lake. So I'm going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves real quick. So we'll start with Joseph. If you will, tell us a little bit about yourself, briefly how you came to be with the Corps, kind of your career progression a little bit, where you started, where you are now, and your main roles at John H. Carr.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Joseph Boswell. I grew up close to John H. Carr Reservoir, and so I was familiar with this area from a pretty young age, although to be honest, I had no idea who the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers was. I just knew this was the lake, and it was a great place to go fishing and go hunting and swim and that sort of thing. It was when I was in college at Virginia Tech studying forestry that I came to a career fair, and there were several Corps of Engineers employees at that career fair on the Virginia Tech campus representing John H. Carr Reservoir, and they were hiring for co-op positions, which are basically trainees. And so I got hired as a forestry trainee and worked for a year in the years 2000 and 2001, helping out with all the forestry stuff here at John H. Carr, and just absolutely loved it. I helped set up timber sales, helped with prescribed burning. In the summertime, we all help in the park, so I got to do that too. Fantastic year. After I graduated from college, I went on and worked for the Oregon Department of Forestry for a few years, doing wildland fire management, and came home to Virginia a few years later to work for the Virginia Department of Forestry as a forester. And then when this forester job came open here at John H. Carr, I came here in 2020, and I've been the forester here ever since then. Loving life.
Man, that's awesome. I didn't realize you worked out west for a while. Oregon is the kind of location for a bunch of those like big timber shows you see on TV and stuff, like on Discovery Channel and whatnot. I think Netflix might have a show about it as well, but yeah, that's really interesting. Obviously, it's way different species than what we have here, but there's some giant trees out there.
Different ecosystems out there. Neat area. Beautiful spot.
Well, that's awesome, Joseph. I didn't know you'd been around so much. That's really cool.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Alec, what about you?
Hi, my name is Alec Mitchell, a conservation biologist here at John H. Carr. I grew up similar to Joseph, about 30 minutes away from the lake. Spent my childhood fishing and recreating on the reservoir. Didn't really know much about USACE other than they were the rangers that came by and always messed up the camping. But after going to college, I went to college in West Virginia, spent my 3 years working for different federal agencies, Park Service, Forest Service, before getting a full-time job with the Corps in Arkansas. And they hired me under the Pathways as a recent graduate. So I really got to dive into what we really do on a day-to-day basis on the park side, learning park operations. And then after that, I moved to Texas as a natural resource specialist, a small project with the lake of only 500 acres, and really got diverse in parks, natural resources. We did a youth hunt every year. And then this position came open, and I thought it was the perfect opportunity to bring me and my family closer to our home, keep us from driving 20 hours to see family.
It's a long one.
But yeah.
And we're so happy to have them both at John H. Carr. You do excellent work.
We're happy to be here.
Awesome. So it's cool how both of your stories are similar, and I kind of feel the same in my career a little bit about going off a ways. You guys went way farther than I did, but going off and then end up coming back home to, or close to home, for that opportunity that just makes sense for the family and to be back closer to them while also doing a career we love. So that's pretty neat.
No place like home.
That's right. All right. So our first question on our main topic today that I'm going to ask the two of you, and either one of you can answer, you both can answer however you guys want to do it. But what does being a forester with USACE, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, mean?
So this is Joseph again. Very broadly, I take care of the forests here around John H. Carr Reservoir. There's about 55,000 acres of land surrounding the lake here. The lake itself is about 50,000 acres. And gosh, I should have done some calculations. There's, on that 55,000 acres of land, there's millions of trees. And the bulk of my job is managing the big chunks of land, mostly in wildlife management areas. But I also do a lot of help with the rangers, particularly shoreline rangers, if they have a question about a particular tree's health that one of their customers is concerned about. Because there's lots of lake houses that are right up next to the property line, and trees on the Corps of Engineers property next to those houses sometimes cause concerns. And so I'll go take a look at them and try to figure out how to keep folks safe while also keeping our trees and forests happy and healthy. The bulk of what I do is manage timber sales, do forest thinning and occasionally forest regeneration through timber sales, and prescribed burning, which is a big team event, but a lot of times I'm leading the charge on that. It's probably my most fun thing to do.
Yeah, it is fun. When you say forest regeneration, what do you mean by that? Because sometimes, having a timber sale can be a bit controversial, right? And we get a lot of questions on that. So what do you mean by why would we be doing a timber sale or thinning to try to actually promote forest health?
Yeah, that's a great question. A lot of it goes back to the history of the reservoir, which was established in the late 1940s and 1950s. A ton of farmland was purchased by the Corps of Engineers to create the reservoir. And a lot of those fields that were formerly agriculture were planted with pine trees. Mm-hmm. In some cases, the farmers who were farming them were allowed to continue farming them, even though it was now government property. Mm-hmm. And they had agricultural leases and they continued farming them for the rest of their lifetime. And after those farmers passed away, the land reverted to management by the Corps of Engineers. And at the time, pine trees were planted in most of those fields. And so those pine trees, in a lot of cases, are now 40 to 50 to 60 years old and were planted with the intent of being managed for multiple uses. One of those uses being production of lumber or fiber for paper, that sort of thing. And they really need to be managed because the trees were planted so close together that it's not necessarily a healthy, functioning ecosystem without them being thinned. And in some cases, it's been so long since they were planted and they weren't thinned that in order to protect them from possible infestation by southern pine bark beetles, we need to cut them all and just start over and replant. Mm-hmm. So we're in those areas, we're managing it sometimes for wildlife habitat, sometimes to prevent damage from pests like beetles, but we're also managing it almost as a crop in a few places.
Mm-hmm. Okay, that makes sense. Are southern pine bark beetles invasive or no?
They are. Yeah, there's actually several species of beetles that impact pine trees. Some of them are native, and they may kill a few trees here and there, or maybe even a few dozen here and there. But the southern pine bark beetle is an invasive beetle that has potential to cause massive destruction to pine trees. Mm-hmm. It can spread from a few trees to a few acres to a few hundred to a few thousand acres in just a couple of years. And so in those cases, we really need to make sure those pine trees are kept healthy and growing vigorously. We try to do that whenever possible by thinning. But in some cases, if the trees are, say, 50 plus years old and they've never been thinned, then they're not going to respond well to thinning. So in that case, we harvest all of them and start over and try to plant at a better spacing and thin at proper times so they're better able to withstand possible attacks. In addition to planted pine management, because that's kind of a small acreage. I mean, we have several thousand acres of that, and I'm not sure exactly what the acreage is, but by percentages, we have far more naturally grown forests that either went through succession from fields that were abandoned a long time ago, or in some cases maybe have been forests forever, as far as we know. But we have, mixed hardwood forests that are kind of in the river bottoms on the rich soils of the floodplain. We typically just call those bottomland hardwood forests. We also have upland hardwood forests, which are typically kind of on the ridges and the hills that historically would have overlooked that floodplain. Totally different communities of species. Mm-hmm. And we have natural pine forests too, which are usually mixed in with the upland hardwoods. As a forester, I manage those totally differently as we manage the planted pine stands. Try to not do any total harvesting in those areas. Try to do thinning and manage them for what they probably would have been hundreds or even thousands of years ago, which would have been more open, fewer trees, but bigger trees, open underneath, more of the woodland or kind of savanna type of ecosystem.
I have more questions, but I know we're going to get to it.
All right. Yeah, I have more timber management questions as well, but we'll get to that here in just a little later. So let's go to Alec. What does being a conservation biologist with the Army Corps of Engineers mean?
So in the broad scope of it, managing the project for habitat, supporting fish, wildlife, and forest resources, that's the big category that we fall under, as well as protection and preservation of threatened or endangered species. We still do quite a bit of work with bald eagles. They're no longer listed as endangered or threatened, but they're still protected. And then we have 2 bat species, one that is already listed as endangered and one that is proposed to be listed. So a lot of my work here recently has been trying to figure out how that's going to affect pretty much our daily work, coming up with strategies on what we can and can't do and the best way to achieve our goals without affecting the endangered species.
What are those 2 species? I'm just curious.
The 2 bats are the tricolor bat, which ranges kind of into Virginia, but most of it's in the North Carolina side of the project. And then the northern long-eared bat, which spans all of Virginia and North Carolina. So we haven't had any confirmed species on the project, but we always take precautions just in case. But habitat-wise, a lot of our work coincides with the forester. So me and Joseph work together pretty much on a daily basis, coming up with ideas and strategies on what is best for forest health, but also creating wildlife habitat. Thinnings and forest regeneration always create a diverse habitat, which increases population. We always get together and kind of determine what would be best for the wildlife management areas that we're doing timber activities in.
Yeah, and I'll butt back in just for a second and say that's one of the things as a forester that I love about working here is that anytime I'm doing any kind of forest management activities, I have objectives that are set for why we're doing those activities. And our top 3 objectives have nothing to do with producing timber. Mm-hmm. We're managing habitat and ecosystem health. And I love doing that. Mm-hmm. Some of my fellow students in forestry school graduated and went to work for forest products companies. Mm-hmm. And, their job is feeding a mill. And, I love things that are made out of wood. And so I appreciate that. Yeah, I appreciate that renewable resource, but I really enjoy being a forester with objectives of habitat management and ecosystem management and that sort of thing. So, yeah.
A term you both have used, which I want to make sure our listeners are understanding, is you've talked about diverse habitat. What do you mean by that? What do you mean by actually having a diverse habitat? The woods are the woods. What does that mean? What does that actually mean from a management perspective from you all having truly a diverse habitat?
Yeah, great question. You want to take it or you want me?
I really think it hits on both sides. The big thing that I can think of is, so if you go into an unthinned stand of ponds or ponds that are growing thick, all those pine needles that hit the ground create pretty much a fertile soil condition where nothing can grow. So by thinning, you're opening up the canopy to let more light in, which allows browse and everything else to grow, which creates
understory vegetation.
Yeah. Other species of plants.
Other trees that can't grow on their own, like our hardwoods.
Yeah, but not just trees, forbs and grasses and wildflowers, all sorts of stuff. They need the sunlight. And in an unmanaged stand of pine trees, there's so much shade that almost nothing else
can grow. And it gets to that crazy, thick, dense stuff that you can't even walk through.
Yeah.
And so wildlife, birds, other stuff, deer, turkey, quail, none of those can even get through there either.
Yeah, I mean, they'll use it sometimes for like bedding and cover, right?
Yeah.
It's not necessarily good for food.
Yeah.
Maybe a bedroom, but it's not a living room or a kitchen.
Yeah, they'll definitely use it for bedding cover, but in the grand scheme of things, it's less valuable to the overall ecosystem than because if you remove all the trees and let it start from scratch with regeneration growing, I mean, that still provides a ton of cover, but it also provides them not just bedding, it provides them food.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Emily. In general, like if you look at the landscape as a whole, there's a lot of totally open land, like farmland, agricultural land, where there's maybe one species of plants growing on it by design, for agriculture. And I love to eat, so I've got nothing wrong with agriculture. And there's a ton of mature forest. There's not a whole lot that's in between. And wildlife really thrive in that in between, In ecology, we talk about succession, which is the stages of different species of plants that grow from that nothing, that open field to mature forest. And we try to keep the entire range of succession from open fields, mostly which is, Alec is managing a lot of those, to mature forests. But that in between, that's where we use the tools of timber sales and prescribed burning to try to keep some different stages of succession. Yeah, because there's tons of wildlife species that need that in between stage.
Okay, so if I'm picking up what y'all are putting down, basically when we say as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers here at John H. Carr, you all as foresters and conservation biologists, when you're talking about managing that diverse habitat, it's really having the whole gambit of different types of stages of forests, basically, in their development and growth. So that way we can have a natural environment that supports pretty much every type of wildlife species out there.
That's exactly right.
So we have some of those fields that you all plant, for food plots and doing things like that, which I know we'll get to that more too. But, we have that. We have these forests where we're using these different tactics, these in-between young forests, kind of, maybe there's a mix of pines, mix of hardwoods, and then we also are managing the pretty old, mature growth forests as well.
Yeah, and I'll say too, there are tens of thousands of acres of land around John H. Carr Reservoir that we don't have practical access to really do anything. And so those acres are gonna be
whatever they are.
Yeah, they're gonna be what they are. And eventually, old growth is kind of a slang term. It's not really a scientific term, but it's a very well recognized term. So they're gonna be old growth. As scientists. We call that a climax community because it's species of plants that can reproduce in their own shape. That's what they're going to be as time passes, like tens of thousands of acres of that, the acreage that we have access to and control over, mostly in our wildlife management areas. That's where we're doing the bulk of our treatments to try to keep some of those other stages of succession. Yeah, that's right. And, the two biggest tools we have for that are timber sales and prescribed burning.
Joseph, if you and Alec don't mind real quick, this is a little off script for what we had planned, but just sitting here thinking, I think it's important for our audience to sort of understand this, but can you guys briefly explain like the history of the ecology of not all of North America, but I guess you would say Eastern North America, from like what we think it was like prior to European contact, and then how after European contact through development, like how that took major changes from mass timber harvesting to nowadays the big worry is land fracturing with building roads everywhere. Can you guys kind of hit on that a little bit?
Yeah, I'd love to tackle that and fill in the blanks where, I missed something. Because honestly, this is one of my favorite topics, talking about like the differences. Yeah, so looking back hundreds of years, and, my opinion on this is kind of informed by different documents that I've read or heard read from early explorers. One of the explorers, and I wish I had this person's name in my mind, and I don't, but I remember this from my forest ecology class at Virginia Tech. One of the explorers described being able to gallop a 4-horse carriage through the woods all day long, except to slow down to cross creeks and rivers and that sort of thing, which really describes that the forests were way more open. You know, they're what we would call a woodland or maybe a savanna. So there's big trees, they're spread out, and underneath is grasses and shrubs and things like that. And that was, as far as we know, that's how it was when the first peoples and the Native Americans were here. And as far as we know, they were here as long as the forests have been here. And they were in a big way using fire to manage these ecosystems. And that allowed them to be what they were at the time.
Yeah, they used fire, but they didn't prevent fire.
Yeah, that's a really important point too. Yeah. That's the big thing nowadays is more so suppression than just letting it. Because, I mean, there's so much new growth and housing communities going up everywhere. So yeah, and you have to. I mean, you have to manage fires these days to protect infrastructure and public safety and that sort of thing. But the Native Americans didn't. They kind of knew how to move around the fire, and they weren't nearly as intense because the fuel loading, you know, the brush and the trees and that sort of thing wasn't so high. You know, so, you know, when Alex said they didn't prevent fires, you know, he's talking about natural fires mostly from lightning would start a wildfire, and they didn't try to put them out. So when Europeans got here, they saw these huge trees as kind of an untapped resource, and they harvested lots and lots and lots of them for multiple things, you know, to build ships, to build cities, to, you know, whatever. And so that drastically changed the landscape. And they decided to put out the fires. And so in, you know, the early 1900s, these agencies were created by the different states and by the federal government, mostly to stop wildfires. And that totally changed the ecology of really the entire U.S. You know, here we're specifically talking about, you know, the eastern U.S., but it totally changed the ecology in terms of how many trees there were growing on a given piece of land, and even the species of trees that were growing.
I was going to say species of trees definitely changed, because I can think of, like, I know it doesn't have to do with the eastern U.S., but on the western side of the U.S., they have pine trees that are kind of going through succession right now, going from cones that were open from fire to not having those. Oh, I forgot the name of
serotinous. Yeah. And there are some of those species in Virginia too. They're mostly in the Appalachians, you know, up in the mountains. But Table Mountain pine is one of those.
You mean
pitch pine?
A species of trees that needs fire to actually produce new trees?
That's exactly right. Yeah, it needs the heat of a fire to open the cone to release the seeds. So without fire, you know, they're really going to their numbers are dwindling and they could go extinct.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you guys very much. I know another excerpt I've read before from an experience from Daniel Boone. He and his son was trying to evade some Native Americans at one point and survived by hiding in a standing hollow chestnut tree. And you just imagine on the East Coast nowadays being able to crawl inside of a standing hollow tree. Like, it's just not, you don't see any trees big enough that can even provide that kind of structure. So just hearing those old accounts, and the one you mentioned, Joseph, about galloping a 4-horse carriage through the forest, I've heard that exact same explorer, and I can't think of the name either. But just to close your eyes and visualize that, like, it almost gives me chills thinking about it every time, because it's just how different it is. I think it would be a really cool thing for someone out there to do like a VR experience of where you put on the goggles and you can walk through the forest the way it used to be, kind of thing. I think that would be like one of the coolest things ever.
I might never take those goggles off.
I know, right? I mean, talk about a meditation space, right? But no, that's but yeah, thanks for hitting that hitting on that for us. So
yeah, I wanted to touch too. You mentioned the American chestnut, and that brought to mind the other thing that the European settlers brought here, which is invasive plants. And well, not just plants, but other species, because the chestnuts were killed by an invasive fungus. Mm-hmm. And that's another thing that Alec and I deal with on a regular basis is invasive species of mostly plants, but, other biotic things too that are changing our ecosystems. And sometimes it seems like an uphill battle, but there's tools that we can use to try to mitigate those things.
And we've talked a lot about the land, but those invasives don't just happen on the land, do they, Alec? They also happen in the water here at the reservoirs as well. So there's a multi-levels on that too.
Yeah.
Yeah. While we're on that subject, Emily, let's hit on, so I'm sure our audience have picked up by now, especially if they've listened to prior podcasts, about the fact that not only does the Army Corps of Engineers manage the dam and the water behind the dam, but also, we're talking about managing the wildlife around it and the forest around it. So if you guys can briefly hit on, how those three resources being water, wildlife, and forest. I know you've talked some already about how you manage it, but kind of if you will, the Corps' overall mission of where that fits into the Corps' mission as far as managing those along with flood control and hydropower and all that fun stuff.
I think with the wildlife aspect, well, really with all three, the big thing is flood management, hydropower, but we also have an objective to provide recreational opportunities to the public and visitors to the reservoir. So by ensuring that we have proper land management and timber management and water resource management, it allows us to provide that recreational opportunity to the public. Nobody wants to go swimming when there's a bunch of hydrilla.
You don't even want to.
Yeah.
The plant that must not be named.
Nobody wants to go swimming in an area where there's a bunch of that growing because it takes away from the recreational opportunity. However, on the flip side, bass fishermen and women love hydrilla because it provides habitat for the fishery. So diving off into the deep end, we have been working with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources to kind of make up for that difference in recreational opportunities by planting water willow, which is a native species to the reservoir, to provide that habitat that we lost from removing the invasive species of hydrilla.
We also do fish structures as well with them.
Yep, we partner with them, and they'll purchase fish structures one year, and then the next year we will provide the fish structures. And it's a good partnership that we have with the Department of Wildlife Resources.
Yep, to create habitat.
Yeah, the water really passes through the project. We use it to create electricity, and we store it here so it won't to kind of attenuate flooding downstream. But we want it to leave our project as cleaner than it was when it came in. And so our role in that is maintaining healthy forests around the reservoir, because forests are nature's water filters.
They are.
They filter out sediment and pollutants that may run in, either through streams or, as surface flow from rain. So maintaining healthy, intact forests is essential there.
Well, in the same vein as what you were just talking about, water moving through our project, I mean, wildlife is the same, whether it's an insect pollinator or a deer or a turkey, they're not stationary. They don't have an address that says their home is exactly, Eagle Point Wildlife Management Area. Here's their address. They're on the move as well. And their experience here as well, is going to impact the larger ecosystem as a whole, which will affect humans, depending on how. And, recreation is just a benefit of the project. It's not why we're here, and so that's, I think, an important connection in the way to steal words out of Alec's mouth, but with wildlife as well.
Yeah, and the other tool we have to protect the water is enforcement of our regulations, which time-wise is a really small part of our job, but it's a really important part of our job. If we, as rangers and biologists and foresters, weren't here enforcing those regulations, I think the reality is people would be dumping sewage into the lake. People would be dumping waste into the lake. People would be, all kinds of stuff, all kinds of trees. Yeah, all kinds of stuff that would impact the forest, which would decrease their ability to filter the water, or they would be just dumping raw pollutants into the lake. So, through enforcement actions, we can help keep that water clean as it moves through.
It's an all hands on deck operation because I couldn't get anything accomplished if it wasn't for Joseph or Emily. Really,
y'all are doing great work.
Really, the day to day wouldn't be done if we weren't a team that all work together. So we all have our own roles in forest and wildlife management.
Yeah, and that's an important point too. Alec and I and our supervisor are just 3 people on this team trying to take care of 105,000 acres. But we have a team of rangers here at the facility too, who help us out almost on a daily basis with various activities.
All that they expect in return is 1 or 2 weekends here, there.
That's right.
A few more than that, but we appreciate you coming and helping us in the parks. It wouldn't happen without you all either. So, it's a balance, and it's a balance for, speaking about enforcement of our regulations, a lot of our rules and regs are in place to help find the balance, right, between human use of this public land and its resources, but at the same time supporting wildlife and our forests and our ecosystems and conservation in that world as well. Mm-hmm. We haven't even talked about cultural resources yet.
We might be here past 11.
Hey, I think, Joseph, if you don't mind real quick, you've mentioned timber harvesting a couple times and how we use timber harvesting to enhance wildlife habitat and that sort of thing. For our listeners, can you kind of explain what responsible timber harvesting looks like for wildlife management and not for, say, a timber company that's just harvesting timber to take to the mill and make money? Can you kind of explain what that looks like visually for our listeners?
Yeah, that's a great question. So as a forester, when I look at the forest, and I'm speaking specifically here of forests that have kind of been through the natural succession process and not so much the planted pine, which is really more like a crop. These natural forests are ever changing, although it's a really slow change. And so if we were to look at it this year versus what it looked like last year, there's barely any perceptible difference. But over time, there's a lot of differences. And so when we're talking about harvesting those forests, we're typically selecting the healthiest trees to keep that have the best benefit for not just wildlife habitat, but whole ecosystem value. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to keep those trees and remove other trees that may be diseased or maybe invasive species. They may be species that wouldn't have been at that particular site if we weren't monkeying with the ecosystem and keeping fire out and allowing other species in. Trying to keep the best specimens and remove others. Mm-hmm. That kind of leads to another topic, very related topic that I want to talk about, which is the value ecologically of oak trees in particular. I love talking about this.
Oh, yeah, they're my favorite. Go for it.
Yeah, oak trees are, I feel like they're almost everybody's favorite for just a multitude of reasons. But oak trees can't reproduce in their own shade. Like they're a shade intolerant species. They need a lot more sunlight to reproduce and thrive than they have in a typical forest that has a really thick canopy and there's a lot of shade hitting the ground. And so what would happen or what will happen in those forests without proper thoughtful management is the oaks are going to age out. And as they naturally die out after hundreds of years usually, they're being replaced by other species that aren't oaks, species that can reproduce in their own shade. And those species, a lot of times, or in a lot of areas, wouldn't be there if we weren't excluding fire from those areas. Going back to the forest that we talked about of hundreds of years ago, they were more open and they allowed sunlight to come in so the oaks could regenerate.
Yeah.
But our forests now are, the young trees aren't the same species as the older trees in a lot of cases. And so in some of our management is with a goal of allowing the oaks to regenerate and thrive for generations to come rather than aging out
And not being successful.
That's right.
I think this is a good segue to go ahead and talk about a little bit more specifically about the tools we use to manage. You just talked about timber harvesting. You want to talk about prescribed burning, both of you, and then also the food plots and everything that you're doing, Alec, and go ahead and keep us moving into the tools section of what we do.
Yeah, so a large part of my day-to-day activities during the summer is, so currently we have 23 wildlife management areas that span a total of around 14,000 acres. And on that, we have food plots on pretty much all of them that are accessible to the public. And what we do with the food plots is to encourage the recreational opportunity of sportsmen and sportswomen to go and use those facilities. I like the idea of having public lands because not everyone is fortunate enough to have hundreds of acres of opportunity to be able to go hunt. So by us having public land, it allows everyone to have the equal opportunity to go out and to recreate, enjoy the outdoors. But on a wildlife standpoint, the food plots allows us to plant various seed mixes. We normally do like sorghum and millet and sunflowers to provide dove hunting opportunities for the public. And then we'll do a variety of mixes to provide food for wild turkeys and white-tailed deer. I've been pushing a little bit to try and create some bobwhite quail habitat. So me and Joseph have been working together on creating some better habitat for bobwhite quail since they're in a decline. And with the food plots, really, it's not so much, it's more to provide a supplemental feed for them during the wintertime. Or, I mean, right now, early spring and summer are very crucial moments for development of white-tailed deer, as well as right now as turkeys are breeding, getting ready for nesting season. So by providing that supplemental food, it helps all wildlife species.
Yeah, Alec, that's great. And on the bobwhite quail side of things, one thing I've been trying to push here as well to help that is, a wildlife management area or a food plot, as we tend to call the open areas, don't always have to be like some sort of forb or grazing food. Like, for example, on the bobwhite quail and the turkeys, we know they both have ample predators now, nest raiders and things like that. One of the things I've been trying to push is planting more bunch grasses, such as like big blue stem, switchgrass, stuff like that, because what that does is create tunnels on the grassland floor for those little turkey poults and baby bobwhite quail to kind of run around and be able to get the seeds from those grasses that are falling on the ground and not have to worry about the aerial attacks from hawks. And it's a whole lot harder for furry four-legged predators to sneak through all that grass after them as well. Have you guys talked about introducing some of those things?
Yeah, we've been looking at a couple different options. There's a couple grants out there where they'll help purchase pollinator species, native grass mixes. So we are currently working on those options, as well as to get back into forest management. Me and Joseph have been working together at creating some some thinnings that open up more of the canopy to let more sunlight hit the ground, which will increase that forb and grass growth. Kind of right now, we're kind of in a test run to see, we'd like to create some savanna type areas to see if we were successful in that. And by that, we would like to be able to run a prescribed fire through there and then broadcast seed some of those grasses and pollinator species that would encourage not just bobwhite, but I mean, everything will use an early, like a savanna type ecosystem. But yeah, we have been looking at options. Native grasses and pollinator species are just very, they can tend to get very expensive very quickly.
Yeah. We do have some switchgrass fields in one of our wildlife management areas in particular.
Yeah, that's awesome. I think that's one thing, a lot of times when you talk to hunters, I was guilty of this before I got educated, but, you see all these hunting shows on TV and stuff. They push these, like big nutritious food plots that have all these different turnips and clovers and chicories and, all this other stuff. And then when they come to a public area and they see a field full of switchgrass, well, to them, a lot of times it gives them the mindset that it's not being managed, that it's just being allowed to grow up or something like that. So I think it's really important to talk about this and, educate people that, it's not allowing it to grow up. It's creating a diversity of habitat to, as we mentioned earlier, to where we can develop or not develop, but maintain and create a diverse ecosystem as a whole.
Yep, that's what I was just thinking. Diversity is, I feel like that is one of our main objectives is diversity, whether it's forest management or wildlife management, because in all retrospect, I mean, the number of hunters that we have coming to our wildlife management area is probably just about the same number of birders that we have come to the areas. So if we focused on one species and only worried about one species, you would lose your diversity with other species that provide a recreational opportunity to the public.
And the wildlife management areas, and it's not necessarily hunting management areas.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great point, Joseph. All right, so I know as far as tools and how you manage forests, we've hit on a lot. Is there anything else that you want to cover there, Joseph?
I don't think so, unless you want to go into any kind of more specifics on anything.
I think we've pretty much covered it for the most part. I mean, we could probably come back at some point and talk an hour about prescribed burning and prescribed burn tactics and that sort of thing.
Yeah. I can talk for 2 minutes about that if you want.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go for it.
We talked about using burning as a tool, but we didn't really talk about how to burn. And I don't know if our audience really understands much about it. So, yeah, so prescribed fire is one of the tools that we use to manage all of our habitats. And it's really important to note that there's a lot of planning that goes into any individual prescribed fire. Here at John H. Carr, there's probably 10 to 20 days a year when we're doing burning. But for each single day of burning, we're doing several days of planning. And, some of that planning is in the office making maps to decide which areas we're going to burn, where we're going to stop that fire, the weather that is necessary and acceptable for the day that we're going to actually do the burning, looking at who the neighbors are and making sure the smoke's going to go in the right direction, not to have a negative impact on the neighbors, how much help we need, in terms of other rangers to come help out in a particular burn, what equipment we need, all that goes into the planning process. Plus there's at least a day, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 days, making sure that the fire lines are in place and safe. And a fire line is, the place where we're planning for the burn to start and stop. Usually it's the lake edge. That's a pretty bomb-proof fire break, that the fire's not going to burn out into the lake. But we also use wildlife roads, or in some cases, we have to create a fire line to connect the lake edge to a wildlife road and remove the fuel so the fire can't burn past that. And we have a couple of different goals when we're doing prescribed burns. One of them is to consume dead vegetation. We call that fuel. So it's the dead leaves, the dead sticks, the smaller dead trees. We're consuming those so that they don't continue to build up and accumulate and cause a wildfire risk. The other goal is to use the heat from that burning vegetation to modify the live vegetation, which opens up sunlight to hit the ground and encourage the growth of other species, hopefully, which aren't trees in a lot of cases, grasses and forbs and things like that, which are just fantastic for a variety of species, everything from insects to, larger animals that eat the plants. So we're using that heat to modify the vegetation, thin it out, that sort of thing. Anything you want to add to that, Alec?
I really think that you covered it pretty well.
Training. Emily just whispered training.
Just make sure our listeners know we all go through training.
Oh, yes.
And you all are burn bosses, and there's whole stuff for that, and that we are very careful and intentional about what we do and when we do it and how we do it.
No, we're just fire cowboys, man. We just go out there and sling out some fire and see what happens.
But I think Dylan's right. We could do a whole podcast probably on so many of the things y'all have talked about, whether it's prescribed burning, the types of plants we're planting, in a wildlife management area, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, here at John H. Carr, we have 4 now or 5 certified prescribed burn managers. 5. Yeah, so any of the burn managers go through training that is specific to managing prescribed burns, from the planning process all the way through to igniting and controlling and the follow-up after a burn to make sure we're meeting objectives and it's done safely. And then every person who helps with the burn is also trained in how to use the equipment, how to keep themselves safe, and how to ignite the fire such that it meets the objectives. We don't want it to burn too hot and kill everything or escape, but we also want to make sure it burns hot enough to meet the goals. So there's a lot of training that goes into making sure all that happens.
Awesome. Thanks, Joseph. I'm going to keep us moving on here just a little bit. I guess this question would be more for Alec. For visitors that are interested in exploring WMAs, where can they find maps or any information? And do you have any tips for those that are interested in exploring WMAs?
To find a guide for our wildlife management areas, they can always come visit us at our project office. We'd be happy to give them some while they're here. If they catch most of our park rangers carry pamphlets with them out in the field too. So if anyone's ever camping or using our day use areas, just flag one of the rangers down and they'd be happy to give one, or let somebody know to come bring the individual pamphlet. But you can also access it online by going to our website and then clicking on the natural resource tab. And one of the sections there is wildlife management area. And if you click on that, it will pull up a whole nother tab that has the whole pamphlet as a PDF that you can view online as well. But for tips, I would just say go out and explore. I mean, each one of our wildlife management areas are a little different. Their layout, each one has different terrain. Some are flat, some are hilly.
Some are surprisingly hilly.
Some are accessible by vehicle. Others, you either have to walk in or boat into the shoreline.
We have 3 that are accessible by vehicles, and then the rest are either via boat or by walking in. I prefer the walk-in ones because you don't have to worry about vehicles, or it's more peaceful.
And we always want to make sure folks pick up their trash. Don't leave your trash. don't start fires in the wildlife management areas, please.
No
Don't.
camping.
No camping in our wildlife management areas.
Yeah, one of the frequent questions we get from hunters is if they have to have a special pass to hunt on the Corps of Engineers property. And the answer to that is no, you don't have to have a special pass from us, but you do have to have a valid hunting license for whichever state you're hunting in.
Yeah.
All the state game laws apply.
That's only if your purpose is to hunt. You don't need anything if you're just going out recreating.
Yeah, it's public land. Come have a picnic, watch the birds, ride a bike, take a hike, whatever. Just don't camp, please.
Another message to go in with that is if you're using public lands for hunting, the Corps does not allow tree stands to be permanently placed or game cameras to be permanently placed. We have had a rising issue of that. So
yeah,
just trying to get the message out.
Put them up, use them for the day, take them down at the end of the day.
Awesome. Thank you guys for that. And one thing I've plugged on a previous podcast that I'll plug for people too, or actually two things for exploring WMAs is number one, download the iNaturalist app to scan any kind of plants, trees, or anything like that you're unsure about and just want to know about. And then number two, if you're new to birding, download the Merlin app from Cornell University. And that thing is absolutely amazing at picking up all the different bird songs and instantly identifying what you're listening to. So yeah, highly suggest both of those things as well.
Yep, I have both of those on my phone, and I use them on the regular.
Yep, same. I love it, man. So I catch myself doing it for fun sometimes. So
it knows the difference between a red tail and an eagle, right?
Yes.
Oh yeah. Yep.
That's a different podcast too.
Yeah. For all those listeners who are wondering, anytime you're watching some sort of Hollywood flick and they have that really loud screech and then they show the scene of the eagle swooping down, the screech is usually a red-tailed hawk. And it's just one of the many tricks Hollywood likes to pull on us. So, all right, moving on. So I'm going to combine our last two questions for you guys. And that is, what did you go to school for? And any tips for people who want to pursue a similar career? And once you got there, what does your day-to-day job look like on average?
So this is Alec. I went to school at West Virginia University for wildlife and fisheries resources and tips for the listeners. I always like to tell people to go and don't be afraid to get outside your bubble. Like I did 3 seasons during school away from home, got me out of my comfort zone, but it helped me become the person I am now for the field of work that I'm in. Yeah, that's probably the big thing is take an opportunity when you have it, especially while you're in school. And then my day-to-day depends on what time of year it is. During the winter, my day-to-day looks like anywhere from mowing, wildlife openings to general maintenance. So you know how we get the typical winter storms, they'll blow down trees. So typically ride wildlife management areas looking for down trees. We have around 150-ish wood duck boxes that I maintain during the winter times. And a big portion of the winter time is spent preparing for our upcoming burn season, which we've already touched on. And then during the summertime, really most of my time is spent either working food plots or spending time helping in the parks.
When you say working food plots, you're on a big farm tractor, either with a bush hog or a disc behind it.
And seeding it.
Yeah. Sowing seed.
Right on, man. That's awesome. What about you, Joseph?
Yeah, so I went to Virginia Tech, and my degree is in forestry with a concentration in forest resource management. And to be a forester, that's a pretty necessary degree. Actually, in the state of Virginia, it's not legal to use the job title forester without having a forestry degree from an accredited university. Tips for other folks, really similar to what Alex said. I greatly benefited from the year that I took when I was in college to work here as a forestry trainee for the Corps of Engineers. Most universities have a huge variety of opportunities like that. So I highly encourage students to look for internships or trainee opportunities, whatever they may be called, or even just, summer seasonal jobs, working in a field to try out whatever it is they may think they may want to do and build some resume experience. Day to day for me, similar to what Alex said, a lot of days are different. I spent a good part of yesterday helping Emily and a few other rangers with an educational program for, were they second graders?
Yeah,
Second graders, talking about a variety of activities, but part of it was wildlife. Also this week, I have been walking the boundary where the Corps of Engineers property meets private property to make sure it's properly marked and there's no encroachments onto the government property. That's a small part of what I do, but it's an important part. Really, most of my time goes into setting up timber sales, writing forest management plans, which is the first step in a timber sale is the planning, as well as planning for prescribed burns, some of which is done on a bulldozer to establish or reopen fire lines. Some of that is carrying a backpack leaf blower, clearing out the fuel from a fire line. Occasionally, the encroachments that I mentioned are when people cut down trees that belong to the government. I have to assess the value of those trees in order to pursue some kind of compensation. So measuring stumps, measuring species, that sort of thing.
Different every day.
It really is. And in the summertime, I put on a park ranger hat, and
which we appreciate.
Yeah, and it's a great variety. Getting to see the other side of our natural resources management, which is interacting with the people who are visiting the reservoir, staying in the campgrounds, using the boat ramps, using our picnic areas.
Human dimensions.
Yeah, yes. The human dimension to natural resources management.
Well, that's awesome, guys. Thank you very much for being here with us today. I greatly appreciate it. I think this is going to end up being one of my favorite podcasts that's been done so far. I think the content of this one is just great. So once again, thank you both. I'm going
to be here. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
Oh, absolutely. Thank y'all for taking time out of your day to be here. It sounds like you're both busy enough as it is.
That's true.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, Grace, I know it's been a while since we've heard from you, but can you tell us what's on the horizon?
Sure. For our next podcast, we're going to cover our shoreline management program, and we'll interview 2 shoreline rangers from John H. Carr, so you're not going to want to miss that podcast.
Awesome. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to another good one. I think these are turning out great. I think it's awesome content for the listeners. So thanks for all the planning you're putting in for that. David, do you have any messages for us to help wrap up here today?
I do. And I just got to echo what you said about Joseph and Alec. I mean, you guys did a great job. It's almost like you guys could do your own podcast, like the Natural Resources, and try to rival us or something. Thank you guys for doing that. I mean, it was very good. But on a serious note, I guess, talking about safety message and stuff, let's say you and your family are going out to a WMA just to check out, the birds, trees, whatever you guys think is out there. And you're walking through there and you hit some water. You didn't realize the lake was this close to the WMA and everything. Your kid tries to go into the water because they think Paw Patrol is out there, or Azuma's out there going to come out of the water. And now your kid's in the water and you weren't planning for your kid to be in the water, and you weren't planning to go in the water and everything too. So just keep that in mind whenever you're going out to public land, especially either the woods or the water. The water is always kind of near the woods somewhere. The lake was built and woods came around it and everything. So just keep water safety in your mind, even when you're not planning to be by the water. You could be by the water. I'm not saying bring a life jacket with you when you're going in the woods, but just keep, water in the back of your head that you could be near it and your kids could be near it without ever thinking that you would be. So just keep that in mind.
Awesome, David. Thank you very much. And with David's message, that wraps us up for today. Thank you for all the listeners that listen. Share this on any of the platforms you use. You can share the links on social media or anything like that. And feel free to leave us a comment. Anything that wasn't answered by Joseph or Alec today, leave us a comment on whatever platform you listen to, and we'll try to go find those and address those in the next podcast. And thank you all very much once again. And I look forward